Hello everyone and welcome back into another edition here of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Happy Friday to you all. This will be the last show of the week. I am as always your host, Christopher Shepard, and we should have a great show ahead to conclude the week. It's Stardom, Situm Day. The last minute decisions you might want to make in your fantasy roster will be determined in my first couple of segments, whether or not you were willing to start a certain player or might want to avoid them this week. Then we get into big fantasy stakes in the best NFL games of the weekend, potentially. Gonna be going over a very specific conference championship matchup in the world of college football this weekend that could have several different implications for the outcome of the final CFP rankings. And then last but not least, we're doing some Stardom Situm yet again, but for Sunday Night Football in terms of that big matchup in the AFC West. But before we get into any of that good stuff, I do want to remind you yet again, as always, if you want more content such as this, consider liking, following, and subscribing to the show in the network. Great way to get involved with the channel, to promote. Everything's going very well here with a lot of different people doing great things with great shows as well in every single sport imaginable. So it's greatly appreciated should you choose to do that. But if you want to interact with our shows a little bit more directly, consider making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. Great way to contribute and interact with the show. You can also do it on our website, gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip, a donation, or comment there, or just do it through YouTube as well. Either way works wonders for this show. It just makes it that much better, that much more interactive, gets you guys out there in terms of your opinions and thoughts on the show as well. But without further ado, let us jump into our first segment of the day here in the show, talking about my favorite starts of Week 14. As always, I compile rankings throughout the week at each position, letting you know which players I believe are viable assets or potential starts for you. And these players on today's list are the final compilation of all these positions, my top players for each of them. So without further ado, let us jump right into them. Starting off at the QB position, this guy is a little bit of an unfortunate player right now in terms of real life because he's putting up historic stats, but his team is not winning football games with them. And so, even though from a real-life standpoint, you have to feel sorry for him in terms of fantasy, he's still the premier guy probably right now in terms of a quarterbacking standpoint. So, it is Joe Burrow who gets the start. I'm going to have to check again. Sorry that I do not remember who they are going to be playing this specific weekend. But, as always, it is the Cowboys. It is the Monday night matchup. Yes, I just wanted to make sure there. But as always, no matter who Joe Burrow is playing, just know that he always has a chance to put up MVP level numbers at least this season. I mean, his team might not win, and that might be a bad thing for their prospects in the future, the Bengals. But right now, Joe Burrow is playing like a prime MVP candidate for one of the most disappointing teams this season in the AFC. And so, in this match with the Cowboys, yes, it's kind of funny considering the fact the Cowboys are going to be coming into this one with a better record, but I still think the Bengals are the slightly better team because this offense doesn't care how your defense is playing. They're going to decimate it. They're going to dominate because they have the superstar talent. It is a matter of whether or not their defense shows up. Because in some certain games this season they have. But for the most part, they really haven't. And they've truly underachieved with one of the better defensive coordinators in the league in Lou Anarumo. I don't know what's going on with that relationship there, but it's truly concerning. But on the offside of the football, just know that Joe Burrow is always going to be reliable because he's really unafraid of any team he's playing. It's just his defense is afraid of everyone it's playing, so to speak. But I really like Joe Burrow as a fantasy player for the long run because he's not going anywhere. His team might suffer around him over these next coming years, but he is going to be the constant no matter what, and he's still going to produce for you in terms of a fantasy perspective. So this weekend, specifically, look for Joe Burrow, win or lose, to continuously put up solid stats for you. In the running back position, this is more of a matchups-oriented one here. Alvin Kamara. This is a guy who, right now, is the Saints' saving grace. Without him, I really don't know how many wins he will be. As Teddy Belcher, 4K Ultra Wide 21.9 points out, I believe he's talking about Burrow, this is his only chance to lead the league in yardage, and it's an unusual one at that. I completely agree that at the current point in time, I would say Joe Burrow is going to finish this year with the most passing yards in the NFL, just because of his prolific nature in that offense. But it's so disappointing that it comes in a kind of wasted season for Cincinnati. But it's a good point that this might be his only chance, and it's his least favorable chance in terms of team outlook and overall outlook. Because if it were the case that he ends up winning or getting to that yardage total and being the number one guy there, by all means he would have to be considered an MVP candidate, but right now he isn't. But getting back into the running back position, Alvin Kamara is someone who, like I said, is always going to get the bulk of the touches there in New Orleans because he is their best offensive weapon right now. And whether it be in the running game or even the passing game, Alvin Kamara gets it done for them. And going up against a Giants team that really has nothing to play for, really hasn't necessarily looked solid since, I don't know, potentially week 1 or 3, where they won some games. But I just feel like right now, even though the Saints are kind of in free fall mode, after, there was a little bit of positivity after Darren Rizzi came in the interim, right now they're going to quickly descend down the rankings yet again, but Alvin Kamara is still going to be kind of like Joe Burrow at the quarterback position, in that he's going to be a saving grace for this team from a fantasy standpoint and for you as well. So look for him in a matchup against one of the, if not the worst team in the league, Alvin Kamara, to really stand out. Because at the end of the day, he's like 1 or 2 in terms of guys who would want on my fantasy roster. You obviously have the stars, but Alvin Kamara, just because he's playing on a bad team does not mean his stock is going to rapidly decline. It means that he's an aberration, and you should play him as such, because you should know that being perhaps your best offensive player in a certain team means you're going to get the bulk of the touches. So that's what's going to happen to Alvin Kamara down the stretch. Then at the wide receiver position, another kind of chalk pick here. How about Justin Jefferson? Justin Jefferson's kind of the definition of a fantasy player who allows others to stand out around him. This season, he's really been kind of the occupier of space. That's more of like a soccer term. I'm not necessarily certain a lot of people are familiar with that term from a footballing perspective, but being an occupier of space means that you're still a valuable asset to your offense, but it means that other players are getting heightened production as a result. But this game against the Atlanta Falcons, he's going to have the toughest matchup, and he's going to have to work harder for his yardage. And I feel like, A.J. Terrell can't follow him on every single snap. And Justin Jefferson's one of the best in terms of creating movement after the snap. He's the best in terms of finding his routes and getting to them and helping his quarterback in timely situations. That's really going to show out in this one against his former quarterback. He's going to want to have a revenge game and prove that he can be the star of this team even without a solid quarterback. And so that's why Justin Jefferson is going to be someone who, even though hasn't necessarily performed to the lofty standard people expected of him, is still going to prove his value in games such as this down the stretch for Minnesota. So that's why I really like him in this situation, going up against his former QB in Atlanta. Now, the tight end position, I really love this guy. Truly one of the more underrated players at his position. How about Dallas Goedert playing in what could be a very surprising NFC game against the Panthers? I feel like, the Panthers' defense has steadily improved over these past couple of weeks due to the rejuvenation of this team on the offensive side of the football as well. But Dallas Goedert is a very unique tight end in that he really adds to the physicality of this team, and for some reason his catching prowess gets lost in that. But he truly is one of the elite pass-catching tight ends in the league when you need him to be. He's timely, he's opportunistic, knows where the majority of his targets can end up, and as a result, makes himself available in those areas of the field. And that's all you can ask of a tight end, because of the fact he is so incorporated into their smash mouth style. When he does line up for routes, it kind of makes it a little bit more difficult for the defense to key in on how to stop him. And that's why I feel like in this instance, Dallas Goedert's really going to shine. Because I feel like the Panthers are going to want to stop the run game and try and limit what Saquon does on the ground, and that will open up a lot more for Dallas Goedert's physicality to really show out in this one as well. So look for him to truly be an underrated starter for you this week. And then last but not least, defense and special teams speaks for itself. It's the Minnesota Vikings defense. There should be no other defense this highly ranked in my mind this weekend than the Minnesota Vikings defense, because who wouldn't be motivated to completely annihilate their former quarterback at his house? And so the Minnesota Vikings defense is going to come in here and saying that Kirk Cousins is a reason that our team was willing to let you go, and we're going to prove how deficient you are in terms of creating out of structure, because that's been the point of emphasis for Kirk Cousins' decline these past couple of weeks. He cannot compete out of structure, and he cannot extend plays because he sits in the pocket too long and hopes that his elite weapons get open. Most of the time, that doesn't necessarily happen. Maybe that's a fault on them. But for the most part, you were brought in to elevate this team, and as a result, it's going to be placed more on your shoulders to elevate this team as well. And while I still think he's the right answer right now at the quarterback position for them, if he continues to struggle and they slip out of a playoff spot, then maybe Michael Penix deserves consideration at the QB position. But the Vikings defense is not going to let up on him. They're really going to generate a lot of pressure, going to continuously blitz him with that aggressive Brian Flores style, and he's going to have to come up with a way to try and combat it, and I don't think he will. So that will leave it there for our favorite starts of the week and kind of segues into our favorite sits of the week because of the fact that I think Kirk Cousins, it's pretty obvious what I'm going to say about him in that one. But we'll be right back after this short break to talk about more players who I think you should avoid this weekend.
I feel like I'm losing my